Hi, everybody. I'm Matt.
And I am Steve.
And this is Marvel Reread Club. So, everyone, I guess I'm not ready to report my news yet. If I were going to report news, here's where I would say that But I guess I'm not ready to report that, so instead I won't. Hi, everybody. This is going to be our first non-guest episode in a bit. How are you, Steve?
Hanging in there as best one can these days.
Yes, indeed.
How about yourself?
There's been no shortage of bad news, but here we are. We are doing well here. My daughter makes her Shakespearean debut on Friday as Dogberry in Much Ado About Nothing, which is a great role for her, sort of ideally suited to her talents. My son has a brief 1-month break here before both soccer and baseball resume with a resounding crash. We're making it to there as best we can. How are you?
Well, my daughter is, as we were just discussing before we began recording, going to be doing summer stock in Mount Desert Island, Maine, where her Nana used to live. And she has gone to plays there for much of her life. And now she will be performing in plays there. We are very excited about that, even though it means she will not be able to make it to our big summer family get-together that's been planned for a while, unfortunately. Which is sad.
Yeah, that's a shame.
But it's good news for her.
Yeah, that's great. Should we go ahead and jump on in to the books of September 1967?
I believe that's what we're here for. What would you like to start with?
I feel like I should not do Strange Tales because I was having a hard time following both books in Strange Tales.
You and me both. But sure, I can take Strange Tales. That means that I would also take Amazing Spider-Man.
Okay.
So, Amazing Spider-Man number 52. September of 1967, To Die a Hero. And on the cover, we have Spider-Man and Jameson tied back to back to something that looks kind of like a sea mine down there, although that's not what it is.
Yeah, it's confusing.
While there is water gushing in, and you see what looks like circular dungeon walls behind them. Certainly a compelling cover. You want to know more. So on the inside, To Die a Hero, produced and presented by Stan the Man Lee and John Ring-a-Ding Romita, embellished by Mickey DeMeo, Mike Esposito, and lettered by Sam Rosen. We resume where we left off with Spider-Man having been subdued, I believe, by gas from the Kingpin's diamond cravat pin. He and Jameson are both being taken down into what looks like a dungeon. Now, it looked like Kingpin's office was at the top of a building. So maybe they've already taken an elevator down and now they're going into some sort of dungeon.
Yeah.
I don't know. But it doesn't matter. We're heading to a dungeon and neat stuff's going to happen.
Or maybe this dungeon is on the 20th floor of the building. We don't know.
Yeah, well, there are people who have dungeons all over in nice apartments in New York City, apparently. So, hey, no shame, whatever, that's your thing. So anyway, Kingpin is going to, instead of just putting a bullet in their heads, like multiple times this month, we are going to have, no, I will go ahead and give them a James Bond type death here. So, yeah, he has this circular stone room with some kind of metal thing in the middle. It is not clear at all what this supposedly was.
No.
One way or the other, they are both shackled to this thing that looks like it has some purpose that's never explained. And then they start filling the room with water and close the apparently hermetically sealed stone door. So Spider-Man is able to break free and then start spraying his webs, and Jameson is like, hey, what kind of nut are you? Meanwhile, in the Daily Bugle, Ned Leeds is trying to figure out not only where Foswell is, who has been missing for a while, but also now, where is Jameson, who is now also missing, and he's getting...
And of course, Peter Parker, for that matter. I should say that I was totally wrong in our last episode, or 2 episodes ago. I was like, no, Robbie Robertson is the guy from the band. This is Joe Robbie Robinson. Well, no, that's not true. As it says clearly on page 4, his name is Robbie Robertson. He has the exact same name as the Native American lead singer, wonderful guitarist of the band. At this point in 1967, they were still Bob Dylan's backup band. He was sort of holed up in Woodstock recording what would eventually be called the Basement Tapes with the band. Now, would Stan Lee have heard about Robbie Robertson at this point? Would he be unconsciously copying that name? Unless he's a big Dylan fan, probably not. So this is probably just sheer coincidence.
I think it's sheer coincidence. I mean, I think that sounds like a pretty standard alliterative comic book character name.
Yeah.
I'm guessing it's just pure coincidence. Also, how are we to know that it won't switch from Robertson to Robinson and maybe back again over
Right.
the years? As you said, his first name has switched back and forth from Robbie to Joe at various points. Anyway, we get his name for the first time here, and it's made clear that he is the city editor.
Yeah.
Later, he will have the title editor-in-chief. But last issue, we just sort of saw him talking to Jameson, and that was about it. Ned Leeds is going to go out and try to figure out what's going on so he can report a story. Betty starts freaking out, since the whole reason that she and Pete broke up was because Pete was a crime photographer, and it just seemed too dangerous. And after her traumatic, tumultuous life involving crime within her family, she just couldn't take it. And now she is panicking that her fiance is also heading down the same path. It turns out that Spider-Man was making a web bubble. Kingpin, of course, after this room fills up with water, is like, yeah, it's been like a couple minutes. I'm sure they're dead by now. Go ahead and drain the room and collect their bodies. Not counting that maybe Spider-Man might have something up his sleeve. Yes, he had trapped a bubble of air that allowed them to survive. Spider-Man then starts fighting the goons. He also then breaks Jameson free and is trying to get him out of there, but Jameson is so scared that he just won't move. He's basically the fight, flight, or freeze. He is choosing freeze. Or I guess you don't choose it. It's one or the other. Spider-Man then starts threatening him in order to get him to move, and that gets him to move, but then, of course, just reinforces to JJ that Spider-Man is a menace. Jameson turns a corner and smacks his head right into some sort of a sewer pipe and is knocked out, complete with swirling sparks around his head on page 10 there. We then get a little aside of Foswell and Kingpin. Kingpin is telling Foswell what to do as his lieutenant, and it involves people being killed. So Foswell's like, hey, buddy, I'm all about making money, but I'm not going to kill people. It's like, you used to run all the mobs in New York. You're saying that during the time you ran the mobs were not murdering anybody.
Yeah.
Anybody? Really? Okay. Well, sure. So anyway, he's rebelling against Kingpin. Kingpin looks like he's about to kill him when Spider-Man comes in. We will get back to that fight in a moment, but meanwhile, something quite unlikely has happened. Flash Thompson already has a furlough that has allowed him to return to New York City.
Yeah.
I was not yet speaking by the time our involvement in Vietnam had come to an end. I was less than 1 year old. So I do not have any real memories of this, but from various pop culture stuff about Vietnam, I had always gotten the impression that basically once you were in country, you were there for 12 months. And I checked this online with some of our online people who comment on my stuff from time to time, and folks who are of that generation confirmed that, yes, you would not get a furlough that would get you back to New York City, although usually at 6 months you would get a furlough for like a week or maybe a long weekend that would take you to some place like Tokyo or Hawaii, maybe. One way or the other, though, Stan Lee has decided that Flash gets a furlough all the way back to New York City. They're planning a big party for when they can get Pete there. Pete, meanwhile, though, is a little bit busy having hand-to-hand combat with the Kingpin.
Pete has not had a time for his sporting cast for a long time. It's been a while since he actually got to go on a date with MJ.
Or Gwen, for that matter.
Yeah.
Now, the whole thing about the fight between Kingpin and Spider-Man is Kingpin superpowered? Is he secretly a mutant that they've just never talked about?
No.
Did he somehow get some sort of experiment that made him superhuman? Because we know that Spider-Man has been able to lift tons of machinery off of himself before. So how is it he's getting thrown around by a 300-pound muscle man?
Yeah, he is a strong man. The Kingpin's been working out. He's very, very strong. It's a little more believable when he holds his own versus Daredevil, because Daredevil has no super strength. But Spider-Man's super strength comes and goes.
Yeah. So Foswell is able to find a hidden gun in Kingpin's office and takes the distraction of his fight with Spider-Man to sneak out. Kingpin eventually decides that he is not going to win this fight with Spider-Man necessarily, so he goes and gets in a secret door. He disappears, and apparently it's booby-trapped, so Spider-Man gets gassed when he tries to go down it. Foswell is trying to escape through the basement dungeon section of floor 20 or whatever it is. Jameson, meanwhile, who is knocked out, a leaky pipe is dripping on his head, and he wakes up and feels his head is wet. He's like, "Oh no, my skull's been cracked open. I'm wounded. I'm dying." So it's a funny little thing of him showing cowardice, even though we have seen him show some courage in the last issue.
Yeah.
He's trying to flee and runs by Foswell. And Foswell's like, "Hey, man, you're the one who gave me a second chance." Basically, I think he's regretting not having kept the second chance now that he's realized what throwing in with Kingpin means. So Foswell ends up taking a bullet for Jameson, dying heroically. Still, it seems a shame. They could have just left him as a reformed con, which I think would have been better. But one way or the other, he at least redeems himself in the end, I guess. Although at that point, I don't know if I ever would have trusted him one way or the other if he keeps on going back and forth. But Jameson said he's going to write a whole editorial about what a hero Foswell was in the end. And Spider-Man heads off, and we find out the next issue is going to be a Dr. Octopus issue.
Yes.
That is it for this issue. It is a fun, action-packed issue.
Yeah, the action is just gorgeous in this issue. As you said, it's a little bit dubious that Spider-Man would be able to fight Kingpin like this, but assuming that either Spider-Man doesn't have super strength or Kingpin does, it is one hell of a fight. Just following the action on page 14, Spider-Man gets slammed down and then raises up a knee and then has to dive out of the way as a fist comes down. The action could not be more crystal clear throughout. You really feel every blow of this fight, and they land with a tremendous amount of impact. It is just absolutely beautiful penciling by Romita and nice inking by DeMeo.
Romita does not get enough credit for his fight choreography. I think he's overshadowed by both Kirby and, to some extent, John Buscema. But as you say, this is just amazing stuff. And, also actually, I don't know whether this is something that was actually in the episode or not, but there was a panel several months ago with Mrs. Watson and Aunt May in May's kitchen, and somebody online mentioned that Jaime Hernandez must have taken a look at this panel and made some notes, because I hadn't realized it, but it looked at, you could have told me that Jaime Hernandez had drawn that panel and I would have absolutely believed you.
You mean one of the creators of Love and Rockets?
Yes, one of the creators of Love and Rockets, the one who does the LA-based story rather than the fictional Central American-based story. But I have often just considered Jaime Hernandez one of the absolute masters of storytelling, just giving you the absolute basics and everything you need and nothing you don't need. And I really think he got a lot of that from John Romita Sr. And I don't think Romita Sr. gets enough credit.
Yeah, no, he doesn't. He's really an absolutely gorgeous penciler. This is a beautiful issue. I do look forward to Peter having some time to actually hang out with his supporting cast at some point, especially if he can get to see them while Flash is still in town. One problem with this issue is it's just one of the more extreme examples of let's put him in an elaborate death trap and then close the door and walk away. And it's pretty obvious how Spider-Man can get out of this death trap. Well, let's go ahead and put him in this death trap, and I hope that these shackles will hold him, even though he's super strong. And then they don't. Like, anybody could have guessed that Spider-Man would try to break out of those shackles and might do it. And it's not even that baffling how he gets out of this whole thing. It doesn't even take that much cleverness. If he was able to break out of his own shackles, he could have just broken his feet free and broken Jameson out. But yeah, I do really wish Frederick Foswell hadn't gone bad again. But if you're going to have him go bad, this is the best end of that storyline, ending on a nice moment of redemption and heroic sacrifice. I love the irony that Spider-Man can only get J. Jonah Jameson to move by threatening him, because that's the only thing that Jameson will respond to. And then as a result, at the end of the issue, Jameson is even more anti-Spider-Man than he began. That's a really nice storytelling irony.
Yeah, Spider-Man has saved his son's life twice, I think, at this point, and now his life once. And just every time this happens, it just convinces him more and more that he's his enemy, which reminds me of many things these days.
Yes.
But anyway, one way or the other, I think it's time to move on to Daredevil. And hoo boy, if you liked the whole idea of let's just kill him simply, oh no, let's do it in a more complicated fashion, then you're in for a treat.
I am. Let's go ahead and move on to Daredevil, which is, once again, awful. I don't want to shock everybody. I don't want to blow everybody's mind, but we have another terrible issue of Daredevil. However, this is a issue of Daredevil that never once mentions Mike Murdock. So right away, it's better than a lot of others.
Good point.
Daredevil number 32. To fight the impossible fight, over in Fantastic Four, we had the Sentry saying Wonder of Wonders, inspired no doubt by having recently seen Fiddler on the Roof on Broadway. Now we have To Fight the Impossible Fight in Daredevil. Another big Broadway hit at the time was Man of La Mancha, which has a song called To Fight the Impossible Fight. I think that's the name of the song.
No, I think it's To Dream the Impossible Dream, isn't it?
Yeah, well, one of the lines in the song is To Fight the Impossible Fight. To Fight the Impossible Fight. How do they do it month after month? Smilin' Stanley and Genial Gene Colan have another winner on their hands. Do they? Do they? Inked by John Tartaglione, lettered by Sam Rosen. As you recall, in the last issue, Daredevil, who was truly blind because he was blinded by Hyde Cobra, was being walked home by Foggy with his hand on his shoulder. And then suddenly he didn't even realize it was no longer Foggy's hand on his shoulder. It was the Cobra having presumably killed Foggy and then imitating Foggy's voice. And Daredevil didn't even realize that this was now someone else's hand on his shoulder, someone else's voice, and that he was now being walked home by Cobra. So that's where we pick up.
So, Matt, one question I just now came up with, I had not noticed this when I was reading this earlier. Can you look at the topography that we've got here and tell me where in New York City this might be?
Maybe somewhere in the San Francisco area of New York City. I don't know. This is quite hilly.
I guess maybe somewhere south of Wall Street or way up in Harlem or something like that. Because, yeah, this is a hilly area.
Yeah, up where I used to live around Broadway and 125th, which was a pretty hilly part of Manhattan. Finally, Daredevil catches on that this is Cobra and not Foggy, but can't do anything about it. Cobra leads him to a car being driven by Mr. Hyde. They drive off. Meanwhile, Foggy, thankfully not dead, wakes up having been KO'd on the street. There's a fairly funny sequence where he goes to the cops and tries to tell them that Daredevil is blind. And they're like, Daredevil, blind? What are you trying to pull, mister? And they just viciously mock him and laugh at him.
The funnier thing to me is that Foggy first, just walks into the police station, walks right up to the sergeant's desk, says, Sergeant, you got to do something. The Cobra's captured Daredevil. I saw him. And the immediate response is, give me the details. We'll slap a cordon over the whole city. And every second counts. He's been blind for days. He's like, blind? Now I'm going to laugh you out of here. Well, the first part is just as ridiculous.
Yes. So then, meanwhile, we cut back to Hyde and Cobra, who transfer Daredevil from a car to a boat and take him out to a lighthouse. I'm reminded of John Mulaney's comedy bit about being taken to a secondary location and about how you have little chance of surviving if you're taken to a secondary location. And to this day, as an adult, someone's like, hey, you want to go to a different party after this? And he's like, no. And he's terrified.
Although in this case, the secondary location that they're taking him to is where Hyde had inexplicably created an antidote to the blindness formula. Because, of course, whenever you're creating something that will turn somebody blind, you must also create an antidote. And let's now take him to the place where the antidote resides rather than just putting a bullet in his skull.
Yes. So nice colon art on page 6 of the boat going along in the rocky surf and going to the lighthouse island, which is being buffeted by waves and really looks kind of nice. Again, sort of unnecessary splash on page 7. Colin always makes bizarre decisions as to what gets to be a splash as they drag Daredevil up into the lighthouse. So then,
there are lots of splashes on the page.
Yes,
So,
say splash, splash. Daredevil figures out, somewhat clever, sort of like another movie that came out in 1967, Wait Until Dark. Daredevil figures out to shut down the lights. Of course, normally that would be great for Daredevil to shut off the lights because he has radar sense and everybody doesn't. Now he doesn't have radar sense, so he's flailing around in the dark as much as they are. But they have a pretty good fight on pages 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. This goes on for a long time. 17, 18, yes. 19. they've got a pretty good fight on pages 11 through 19, almost the majority of this issue, where they're all flailing around in the dark. But somehow, while flailing around in the dark, Daredevil is able to get that wonderful antidote and save himself and get his radar senses back. You think it'd be nice if they have something like, oh, this will undo your blindness thing. If it could just give him his sight back, that'd be nice. But no, it gives him back his radar sense. They get in a big fight. Hyde gets away. Cobra doesn't. Cobra is hauled off on a police helicopter, and Hyde gets away in a boat. Next issue, beaten by the Beetle. Well, that's wonderful. This is, borrowing Hyde and Cobra from Thor was bad enough, but borrowing the Beetle from, I guess, Human Torch and Spider-Man is even worse.
Yeah, the hits keep coming.
Yeah.
Just a couple more things about this. One, have you ever been inside a lighthouse before?
Yes, I live in Evanston, Illinois, which is famous for its lighthouse, and I've been inside. Are you pointing out they tend to be rather narrow?
I'm pointing out that especially the very top, which they make it very clear, they're at the very top of the lighthouse. It's nothing but panoramic windows that are maybe less than twice an arm span across. And yet there's this whole lab with heavy machinery and a generator and all sorts of crazy stuff up there.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a little ridiculous. Also, I guess that where this lighthouse is must be off the South Jersey shore.
I guess.
Now, the reason for that is that they specifically refer to it as, I only know it's somewhere near the shore because I can hear the rolling sea at my right. Well, the only place in America that people generally tend to call the beach the shore is South Jersey. So
yeah.
he could tell by the sound that not only was he near the ocean, but that's where he was. Yeah.
I can tell I'm near the shore because I can hear Snooky over there and the situation. I feel like we found an antidote. Like, I'd rather it just wear off. That blindness thing they hit me with, or that thing that knocked out my radar sense, it's gradually worn off. Now I can win the day, rather than trying to get an antidote, which, again, why would he have ever created an antidote for this?
And then why would he have brought him to the antidote?
Yes.
Oh, and I will also point out, this is the second time in the same 2-issue story that Hyde and Cobra have had Daredevil dead to rights. And then Hyde has been like, no, I have something better for him. And this time, I don't even know what it was going to be. Like the previous time it was like, oh, I'm going to blind him. That's going to be fun. But this time it's like, no, I'm just going to, instead of killing him here, we'll kill him in the lighthouse. And Cobra is not too bright, but even he's like, dude, this seems like bad ideas. I don't like this.
But ultimately, this is a pretty good issue. I think it's a shame that we seem to have permanently replaced Giacoya with Tartaglione, who is a much weaker inker, but there's a lot of action in this issue. I really like the fight in the pitch blackness. They could have gotten lazy and just had 9 pages of black panels, but instead they've just got them colored in dark blues. I really liked the fight that takes up most of the issue. And hey, there's no mention of Mike Murdock, so that alone makes for a pretty good issue.
Wasn't it Alex Raymond doing Secret Agent X9, who when he ran out of time for his deadlines would just have the last panel be black and it says, then the lights went out.
Yes.
Busy with Flash Gordon. If he's going to cut corners, it's going to be on Secret Agent X9. So let's move on to the Mighty Thor. The one you've been waiting for, this battleground Earth. And Thor is coming at us, swinging his hammer, shouting, "For Asgard," as we see a couple of weapons facing him. We will see a lot of people shouting "For Asgard" in this issue, although in all of the upcoming incidents, it is going to have 3 A's at the end. For Asgard!
Yes.
Which we've never seen before, and then suddenly we see it like 4 times in this issue. So this battleground Earth, conceived in grandeur and produced in majesty by Stan the Man Lee and Jack King Kirby, embellished by Vincent Coletta, lettered by Sam Rosen.
So this is a damn shame. That last issue we had Bill Everett inking, and it looked 1,000 times better. And it turns out it was just for 1 issue, and now Coletta's back, which is heartbreaking.
So our continuing story, the Enchanters were the villains this time around. There are 3 enchanters. They have these sort of amulet medallion sort of things on their chests that have faces in them, and they are what they call them the talismen, like a talisman, but
Sure.
then plural would be men. Sure, why not? 2 of them have remained on Earth to fight Thor, Balder, and Sif, and Balder and Sif have shown up here specifically for this fight, but one of them has gone to Asgard to try to challenge Odin. We start out on Earth where Thor is talking to Balder and Sif about the situation, and then one of the talismen is projected into Don Blake's office window, finding them. Essentially, this is the enchanters seeking them out and finding them. Thor throws his hammer at the face, but it's just a projection, essentially. We do have on the bottom of page 3, panel 4, one of those infamous panels where clearly the backgrounds were all erased. Kirby did not have a tendency to draw people just floating in an empty space there.
If only Bill Everett had stuck around, we would know what was supposed to be in the background of that panel.
Meanwhile, in Asgard, Odin seems to be watching some sort of wrestling match when a big bruiser with empty eyes comes up saying, "Make way for the power of the living talisman." He is destroyed by Odin's scepter of power.
I'm sorry, are we just going to skip over how magnificent Odin's throne is as he's watching this wrestling? Because, oh my gosh.
I guess we're not.
No. Indeed, we are not. What on earth? It's got 4 big log pillars, and then it's got a sculpted gold winged serpent going around one of the pillars. It's got huge horns. It is one hell of a desk chair that he is sitting on. You know, if you want to really be the best at Switch, this is the gaming chair you need.
And at the top of 2 of those wooden posts are what look like police lights, like on college campuses. It's like a little panic button in the middle of campus where it's got a little blue flashing light on a pole. It's got a couple of those on it as well. So Odin disintegrates the talisman with his scepter of power, and then out of the smoke comes the actual enchanter who challenges Odin to a battle for the Odin sword. Odin points out that if the Odin sword moves, as we have found in some of the Tales of Asgard stories before, that could signal the end of the world. Essentially, it could bring on Ragnarok. So the talisman's like, yeah, I don't care. The Ragnarok's about you guys, not about me. That's totally cool with me. Meanwhile, on Earth, we get the first of our "For Asgard" in the Eternal Realm, the Realm Eternal, which reminds me a little bit of, you remember the cartoon character from our youth, Captain Caveman?
Yes.
One of the enchanters is able to wrest a chunk of street into the air and make it levitate and leave Sif and Balder back on the Earth. They apparently cannot fly in this case, although Sif can teleport herself in various ways, so I don't know that that makes sense. But Thor is now fighting these 2 on this little floating platform of asphalt over the city. We get another "so saying, again I strike for Asgard." Okay. Yes. So the enchanters have a lot of weird powers. At this point, the one who Thor is swinging his hammer at turns into some sort of sticky mess where Thor can't get his hammer out of it. They then look like they're almost all the way up into the edge of space, and they're about to knock Thor off of the chunk of asphalt, and his hammer is still stuck in the other weird sticky enchanter. The other one is smashing at him with some kind of a pole or a mace or something like that. Thor throws him off the edge, and they're like, "Yeah, don't you know that we can levitate?" He's like, "Well, no, I didn't, but okay, now I do." The enchanter who's not levitating is able to heat up Mjolnir to an impossible temperature, so Thor can't grasp it right now. So he's like, all right, fine, we're going to settle this like men, and just goes out after the enchanter and is just punching him in the face until his hammer comes back. Apparently it's had enough time to cool down. The other one ends up turning into some kind of sticky smoke or something like that. Really, really odd power sets on these ones.
Yeah.
So meanwhile, Odin takes up the challenge of the other enchanter. They have this epic fight that spans universes here. They're like, we just see flames and explosions and cosmic backgrounds and exploding planets. It's really, really amazing. We get once more a bit of a hint that Balder is falling for Sif, and I don't know if Sif is falling for Balder or not, but certainly he is for her, and he's like, this is not cool. I am Thor's friend. This can't go anywhere good.
Her slender arms about me, they awaken a feeling I dare not possess, for she is the beloved of him who is more than brother to me. But yes, so he is crushing on Thor's girlfriend here and accepting a hug from her sort of under false pretenses, because she doesn't seem to realize what this hug means to him.
Meanwhile, that chunk of asphalt begins to float back down to Earth, and the gassy enchanter, gassy, that means something else. The the engasified enchanter begins recongealing, and confusingly enough, one of the enchanters says there can be only one answer. Odin and Forsung, who is the third enchanter, are fighting the ultimate battle, and both have renounced their powers until the end is come. That did not look like those two had renounced their powers as they were battling across the cosmos.
I don't think
just me.
I saw it as like they're channeling all their power into the thing they're battling over, and they've renounced any power over anything other than the thing that they are channeling all their power into. It sort of made sense to me.
But then also it turns out that Thor also is losing any of his superhuman strength as part of this. So they're now all just big muscle men and not superpowered Asgardians or enchanters anymore. I think they're really lucky that this thing of asphalt doesn't just plummet at the speed that gravity would normally do so. But yeah, fortunately it floats.
There are speed lines on page 15 looking like it is plummeting, but then we never see it hit the ground, so it seems to land rather gently.
So once it hits the ground, Balder and Sif join the fight. Balder, once again, one more, for Asgard! And the enchanter's like, let him shout as he will. The mace of Brona shall still prove victorious. So then Thor is able to defeat the enchanters, and then Thor and Balder and Sif are like, we must get back to Asgard and find an answer to what is going on. Next, abandoned on Earth.
They can't get back to Asgard because Sif's teleportation power is not working. And it's amazing this comic runs for 20 years before Walt Simonson finally has a storyline in which it's been raining and now there's a rainbow and we can take a rainbow back to Asgard. Like the idea that Asgard is actually on a rainbow bridge that you can get to from an earthly rainbow is one that doesn't come up until Simonson is doing the book 20 years from now. I thought this was a good issue. It was kind of a shame that Balder and Sif get sidelined from the action. Like, there's a bunch of enchanters. There can be as many enchanters as Stanley and Jack Kirby want to create. Why not have enough enchanters that Sif and Balder get to get in on the action instead of Thor hogging two of them and Odin hogging the third one and
Balder hogging Sif.
Yeah, that was the only issue I had with this. And just in generally, the plot doesn't advance very much. You know, they were on Earth fighting the enchanters when the issue begins. They're still on Earth fighting the enchanters when the issue ends. I guess the enchanters are sort of knocked out. It's a little unclear, but it's still the same basic setup it was at the beginning of the story.
Yeah, just that they're now all powerless.
Yeah.
Shall we move on to Tales of Asgard?
Oh, yes. Let's do Tales of Asgard.
Tales of Asgard, home of the mighty Norse gods, the beginning of the end.
So sadly, this is the beginning of the end. This is the penultimate story of Tales of Asgard. They're going to go ahead and end the feature, and I wonder why, because they seem to be having the world's best time creating it. But they're going to go ahead, and I believe next issue is the final Tales of Asgard. So this is the beginning of the end.
Well, that is a shame. I will take your word for that. I do not know. So, by the flaming fury of Forbush, here be grandeur freely given, as conceived and created by Stan the Man Lee and Jack King Kirby, embellished by Vince Colletta, lettered by Sam Rosen. So, the exact same creative team that was on the main feature. Satan's 40 horsemen have finally enclosed in battle upon the Warriors 3.
Well, not the Warriors 3. Thor and two of the Warriors, too. Volstagg is still mysteriously missing. Well, Volstagg, when last we saw, had been sucked down into a dungeon by a wicked maiden with a trapdoor and is, as far as we know, still down there.
Very important detail that I had mangled there. So yes, Satan's 40 horsemen have engaged with 3 Asgardian warriors. Warriors 3 with Volstagg swapped out for Thor.
Yes.
So we get just some epic battle scene here for the first 2 pages. And as it looks like Thor has his back literally to the wall with spears coming at him from everywhere and daggers and whatnot, we end up seeing him joined and defended by Alibar. Alibar was the thief who was going to be executed before Mogul turned him into a knight, basically, to have him lead the 40 horsemen, because, why waste one of his own warriors to do this when he can have an expendable thief? But then the thief apparently is just like, yeah, that's not okay. Now that we're right here, I'm going to change sides. So they're like, okay, good, valiant warrior, fantastic. They fight off Satan's 40 horsemen, but they make it clear that they are just regrouping for another attack because they cannot be killed, and they will just keep on coming over and over again until they win. We see that Mogul still has that bioweapon that he's going to use to essentially kill the entire, planet, world, universe. It's unclear, but kill everybody.
Let's say land.
Yes, everybody in this land. We get to see a little bit of Hogun's countrymen who are still around, though scattered and hiding. And yes, they do look like people of the East Asian steppe over there. Satan's 40 horsemen regroup. As they're coming, we get our 4th in this issue for Asgaaard. Again, I don't think I've really seen them do that with the 3 A's until now, and suddenly we get it 4 times in one issue. The riders of Satan's 40 horses, meanwhile, answer back, "For Satan!" I'm like, wow, that's kind of on the nose. But as they're about to close, they get blown up by this green energy weapon, and they turn around, and there's Volstagg with that magic bazooka thing that he found in that dungeon that he had gotten down into. So he is here to save the day. Who knew that Volstagg would be the one to come and save everybody from certain destruction? And yet here he is.
Yes, we saw him get this bazooka at the end of last story, and now it turns out he can come back and save the day with it, which is wonderful. I dearly love Volstagg. As longtime listeners of this podcast know, he is maybe my all-time favorite Marvel character, and I love that this epic storyline gets to end with him, after having ironically found this super bazooka, him ironically then getting to save the day with it. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, I don't think I really have anything more to say about this. Yeah, I had one art thing I was going to point out in the main story just about Vince Colletta being not good.
What? Vince Colletta not good? What? This is the first I've heard about this.
Yes. Once again, I often find some things to like about him, but yes, I will definitely acknowledge when he is not good. What it is, back on page 6, the first panel with the first "For Asgaaard," one of the enchanters is holding a sword, and it just looks like, what is that shape? You just see the tip of the sword just drawn in with like a ballpoint pen. And no details, no shine on it, no thickness to the line, nothing. And I'm just like, what on earth are we even looking at? So let us move on to Tales to Astonish, shall we?
Okay, let's go and do Tales to Astonish number 95, The Incredible Hulk and Prince Namor the Submariner, A World He Never Made. So, A World He Never Made is a quote from an A.E. Housman poem called The Laws of God, The Laws of Man, which I guess Stan Lee really loves. And it became one of Marvel's favorite phrases. And then Steve Gerber comes to love when he creates Howard the Duck, who was often described as being trapped in a world he never made.
Yes, Steve Gerber, with whom I worked towards the end of his life. We never met, but he wrote the book Hard Time that I was the inker on for 5 issues.
Yep, very cool. It says on the cover, "A World He Never Made, Go, 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 Hulk." So we have a very literary reference and then a seeming implication that Hulk is the world's scariest go-go dancer. But first, before we cover Hulk, let's go ahead and do the Namor story. The Power of the Plunderer.
That's right. Once again, they swapped them here in Marvel Unlimited. So let me jump back to Namor here. There we are.
Prince Namor the Submariner, The Power of the Plunderer. Oh boy, we were never big fans of the Plunderer when he showed up in Daredevil. And indeed, he's not great here. But the story actually isn't terrible. So we have one of the great mysteries of Marvel Comics here. It says Stan Lee stoically supervises a Roy Thomas, Raymond Murray, Marais, Bill Everett, apex of amphibious accomplishment, incredibly invincibly inked by Vince Colletta, indelibly illegibly lettered by Artie Simek, and now, lest we forget, Imperious Rex. So huge mystery of Marvel Comics. Who was Raymond Murray? Nobody knows. There is absolutely no information about him online.
Okay, I was able to find at least some speculation on something called collectededitions.com, where actually the post is named Who Was Raymond? Well, and I was going to pronounce it Moraeus. Who knows how he pronounced it. But so apparently he wrote a couple of stories for Warren Comics, 2 stories for DC Hawkman, and some Marvel. This person speculates that he may have been Richard E. Hughes from ACG Comics, as evidently when his company folded, he wrote Hawkman for DC. I can find nothing in the credits for Showcase Presents Hawkman Volume 2. Does anyone know if they're the same person? Somebody else points out some of the Marvel stuff that he wrote. But then a third person comes by later and says, reviving this old thread with some info I found online. I found some mention of Raymond Murray or Moraeus in this listing for the Anne-Marie Madison papers. Quote, the collection contains correspondence and photographs of the many, in quote marks, boys hospitalized with AIDS for whom Madison cared. This listing includes a 1977 graphic novel by Raymond Murray called Land of Heroes, A Tale of the Future, and also gives his date of death as June 6th, 1988.
Okay, you found much more information than I did. He mysteriously shows up in Marvel Comics writing both Namor and Doctor Strange this week, which is why my curiosity was piqued. Now, I should say that I always get excited when I see his name because I always mistakenly think it's Alan Resnais. Now, Alan Resnais was one of the greatest art house writer-directors of his generation. He did Hiroshima Mon Amour. He did last year Marienbad. He did Night and Fog. And he was famously a big fan of Stan Lee. And he had around this time contacted Stan Lee and said, I want to work on a movie together.
Yes, I have heard this story, but I didn't remember the name.
So every time I see Raymond Murray, I'm like, wait, is this Alan Resnais? Just because they both end in AIS. And is this the great French auteur writing an issue of Namor and Doctor Strange? No, it's not. They seem to be totally unrelated. So we will leave that mystery where it is. You've uncovered all sorts of fascinating possibilities. But this story I kind of like. Of course, it's totally unclear who's doing what in this story because we've got Lee, Thomas, Murray, and Everett here, all 4 of whom are writers. And who on earth is writing this story? But somebody is writing this. We have Namor and Dorma swimming along when they see a surface man has built an undersea city on the bottom of the ocean. And it's like, what's going on here? He is not happy about this and finds this is Dr. Walter Newell, who has been building this city on the bottom of the ocean for entirely anodyne reasons. He is trying to save mankind and thinks that mankind's future lies on the bottom of the ocean. Namor is not having it. He is not happy.
You could call it anodyne reasons, but on the other hand, you could say, oh, here is someone of Western culture showing up to set up a resource extraction operation on Atlantis's doorstep. And we have been known to have resource extraction operations in many other parts of the world, and it usually does not work out well for those people.
Yes, it is true. It says, bullpen note, we regret that due to various patents pending, we are unable to present a more detailed diagram of the Dome City at this time. There's always a question of when interacting with submarines, how do you actually get onto the submarine? In this case, Namor can just swim right through the bubble of the submarine because it's made of ultra polystyrene, a new synthetic material. Yeah, the guy's like, oh, it's cool. We can all just hang out. We can get along. Namor is like, no, I'm not having it. When suddenly a third party shows up, the Plunderer, in his own submarine to try to take over the city. He starts attacking it, and then you have this big 3-way battle where Namor doesn't like either of them, and they certainly don't like each other. And the Plunderer cracks open the dome of the city, and we see everybody in the city starting to drown. I like Everett. I think Everett's a good penciler. I think Claude is not a good inker, but one of my favorite penciler and inkers in comics history is Paul Gulacy, and he would later have to draw this same sort of thing when he does the wonderful James Bond graphic novel, Serpent's Tooth. You have an undersea domed city that cracks open and the water comes rushing in, and Gulacy does an amazing job with it and puts Everett and Claude to shame. Now Namor also has to get on board the Plunderer's submarine through a different method. He ends up fighting the Plunderer for several pages. Finally, he decides to go back and try to save all the people who are in the city, which could not look more wrecked and really looks like it's not doing very well for itself on pages 10 and 11. Namor ends up saving Dorma. All of the people who were on, now let me stress this, the bottom of the ocean, float up to the surface, and they are fine. None of them get the bends, and they are rescued by a passing cruise ship. Namor decides he's going to go deal with the Plunderer. Next issue, he who would invade the Savage Land. Presumably that's the Plunderer. And that is the end of this issue. I think it is a true tragedy that now Coletta has also shown up here to ink Everett. I think that is an ugly combination. And I'm utterly baffled as to the 4 accredited writers on this issue and who did what. I'm baffled as to who Raymond Murray was. But I thought that this was a shockingly good issue, given all of the reasons for it to be terrible. I thought that the general concept of humans are building cities on the ocean floor, and this is leading to general debate about what do they call it? The curse of the...
I mean, I've sometimes heard it referred as like the oil curse or whatever. Yeah. But yeah, it's that if you are a poorer, weaker nation who has a lot of resources that should make your country rich, it almost always ends up making your country corrupt and impoverishing the people more than it helps them.
Yes.
Now, granted, as we've discussed before, I already consider Atlantis pretty darn corrupt.
True.
So I don't know how much that's going to change things, but one way or the other, he's like, yeah, you guys don't care about me. Yeah, you say, oh, don't worry, we'll trade with you. It'll work out good for both of us. And Namor's like, yeah, I'm not falling for that. That's not going to be good here. So the Plunderer had knocked out Submariner with his Vibro Ray during their fight and thought he had killed Submariner, but then he wakes up. That's when Plunderer's like, well, then you know you've been defeated. I shall now eject you out of this vacuum tube back into the water to tell people how badly you were defeated. And of course, once again, it's like, don't throw me in the briar patch.
Yeah.
Like, come on, Plunderer, how dumb are you? Yeah, I'm never a big fan of the Plunderer. And although I do kind of like what we've been doing with Submariner recently, with having him getting involved in these 3-way fights where he is sort of almost orthogonal to the other fight that's going on over here.
Yeah. Okay. Should we go and move on to the back half of the book with the Incredible Hulk?
Let's do it.
All right. The Incredible Hulk, a world he never made. The Hulk, when last we saw, is on a ship that is headed to whatever the High Evolutionary's planet is. They make it pretty clear here that he is going way out into the galaxy. So this is not presumably Counter-Earth on the other side of the sun. That won't be established as the High Evolutionary's planet for another couple of years worth of Marvel Comics. We have a startling, spectacular, star-studded sensation by Smilin' Stan Lee and magnificent Marie Severin, embellished by Herb Trimpe, lettered by Sam Rosen. So again, we've got future Hulk penciler Herb Trimpe getting his start as just an inker on Marie Severin. I think it's a really nice combo. For some reason, I don't like it as much as the same combo on Doctor Strange. I think that that is the most ideally suited book to Marie Severin's strengths, but I still like her work on this book quite a bit. The Hulk is hearing High Evolutionary talking to him through the radio. Hulk just responds by smashing the radio. And then the High Evolutionary was trying to warn him he's about to go through a cosmic storm. The new man who Hulk knocked out last issue, who is seemingly one of the new men who is not reverted to savagery, is trying to then explain to Hulk, those are no ordinary dark clouds. We're headed into a cosmic storm. If we cannot change course in time, look out. The first blast is already hitting us. He's like, I have to pilot us through the cosmic storm, even though it's going to kill me. It does kill him, transforms to Bruce Banner. Bruce Banner falsely assumes that the Hulk killed the guy. The ship finally lands on wherever the High Evolutionary's planet is. The High Evolutionary
not only does he assume the Hulk killed the guy, he's also like, and also I'm in deep space. Last time I knew, I was just on Earth. What has happened?
Another upsetting thing.
Yes.
He lands on the High Evolutionary's planet. The High Evolutionary is like, oh, I was hoping to have the Hulk and use the Hulk as one of my toys, but I guess I'll just go with you, human being. And though we all may perish in the attempt, I shall transform you into the type of being that will walk the earth 1,000,000 years from now. And Bruce Banner thinks he's mad, but I'm powerless to stop it. So long as the vacuum ray surrounds me, I can't become the Hulk. Next issue, what have I created? So I think this is a perfectly fine issue. It advances the plot. I always like the High Evolutionary. I like the heroic sacrifice of the new man. I always like the new men. I think that this is a perfectly fine issue of the Hulk. What did you think, Steve?
Generally, a High Evolutionary can be a bit of a I can have a bit of a problem with that just because, and once again, when I was a kid reading this stuff, it would still seem a little bit weird to me how they treated the idea of evolution in Marvel Comics.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just bothered me more as I've gotten older. It's just like, oh, yes, well, we happen to be able to figure out exactly what human beings are going to be like a million years from now. And, the new men, it's like, let's evolve them into humans. That's clearly where animals are going to evolve to, right? To humanoid species. But that's a personal issue when it comes to what takes you out of a story, and different people have different things. And that's one thing that can be for me. The only other thing that I'll mention is I know that you have talked before about how you don't want a hero where the most heroic thing to do would be for him to kill himself. We do have a moment in this issue where Hulk says, "Everyone who is close to Hulk must suffer. Why didn't Rays kill me too? Why must I live?"
Yeah.
So, suicidal heroes, not necessarily the most entertaining thing in the world.
Yes.
But overall, yes, I like the job that Marie Severin and Herb Trimpe are doing here. And this is an interesting place to take the plot.
Okay. We should go on to X-Men 36. So I should preface our discussion of X-Men 36 by saying that I got confused. Yet another instance where I got confused last time. 2 episodes ago, we read X-Men and it said at the end, next issue, Meccano. After that, in last episode of this podcast, we went ahead and read the Captain America story where Captain America was fighting the Mecco Assassin. And then halfway through that story, I stopped calling him the Mecco Assassin and I started calling him Meccano, which was a not unreasonable mistake for me to make the leap from Mecco Assassin to Meccano. But that was not Meccano. This is Meccano here in X-Men 36.
Yes, Meccano lives, and we see a fight scene on the cover. Now, Matt, you were telling George, our guest in the previous 2 episodes, that he was unlucky that he got the final Werner Roth issue of X-Men. And if he had come the next month, he would not have to endure a Werner Roth issue of X-Men. So this issue, even though the penciler is one who will go on to do good work, I think this issue is significantly worse art-wise and writing-wise for that matter. And I'll just point out that here on the cover, the perspective is just ridiculously wrong.
Yeah.
There's a whole separate set of vanishing points for the foreground than for the background.
Yes. I assume this cover is by Andrew. It doesn't say. I'm not completely certain who does cover, but the inside has art by Ross Andrew, who has already been a pretty great DC penciler for many years doing Wonder Woman with Mike Esposito on inks, and is going to move over to Marvel full-time within a couple years and have a wonderful run on Spider-Man. I am a big Ross Andrew fan, but this issue is terrible. I will go ahead and steal the credits from you here. It says Stanley punctiliously presents a Roy Thomas Ross Andrew panorama of pandemonium-packed panels inked by George Bell, lettered by Sam Rosen. Obviously, George Bell, not a great inker, not doing Ross Andrew any favors here, but really, this seems like Ross Andrew must have had to pencil this issue very quickly or secretly on deadline while he was still working for DC doing that month's Wonder Woman. It's unclear, but this issue is just tremendously sloppy and ugly. As you said, just atrociously written as well. One of the dumbest X-Men stories you're ever going to read.
It reads almost like a Spidey super story, but not trying to teach you vocabulary. Right? It's like a Spidey super story without the only redeeming quality of Spidey super stories.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just bad. I will try to go ahead and dispense with this relatively quickly. There are a couple of burglars who come into the X-Mansion. Hank is taking care of them, even though being in costume as an X-Man doesn't seem to be like the best idea. The rest of the X-Men are trying to figure out how to find the professor downstairs. They're like, yeah, we don't need to worry about Hank. He'll let us know if he needs us. I'll say that on page 3, panel 4, that is just a particularly bad looking panel. Just look at the size of the burglar who's trying to tackle the Beast. It's just the body proportions make no sense. Anyway, Beast eventually gets them and then drags them down to the basement so we can see all the X-Men in the school. Well, no, that's not a good idea. Oh, don't worry. We're just going to lobotomize them. So apparently Cerebro can also do the mind wipe thing and then gives them a post-hypnotic suggestion to turn themselves into the cops.
Yeah, we've never seen before Cerebro have any powers, anything like this. We've seen Professor X wipe people's memories, but we've never seen Cerebro wiping anybody's memories before. But apparently it has little helmets just for that purpose that they can put on you at any time. So watch your back, kids.
The X-Men, meanwhile, have figured out where in the Alps the professor is, so now they need to get to Central Europe. Well, no problem. They've got a plane. We've seen they've got their own plane in an underground hangar. Oh, it's out of gas, and they can't afford the gas. Okay, so what are we going to do next?
We're going to waste a whole issue trying to get gas money.
Yes.
This is gas money, the issue.
So they take the Rolls-Royce into New York City and try to commit welfare fraud to get the money. Literally welfare fraud.
And the welfare workers are not having it. They're like, excuse me, hello? What exactly are you trying to do? And they're like, fine, don't give us any welfare money. We're going to drive off in our Rolls-Royce. And then the welfare workers are looking out the window going like, okay, what the hell? Are those the two people who were just asking us for welfare driving off in their Rolls-Royce? Now you realize that our Uncle John was famously a welfare worker in New York City for his entire working career and would have been going strong. So maybe this is our Uncle John, who they have stopped off at the office of, and who is thankfully keeping welfare fraud from going on.
I remember that he did a lot of work that was driven by his Jesuit Catholic philosophy, which generally had to do with helping the downtrodden, but I had not remembered that he was actually a welfare worker. So next they're like, hey, we can just work a day at a construction job. So they go to the construction site. They then sneak into a building to change into their X-Men uniforms. Then they're like, hey, we can work for you today. And they're showing all these examples of all this work they can do with their superpowers. And I'm sitting here thinking this whole time, won't the construction workers be upset to have these people just swoop in and take a lot of their work from them? And indeed, the foreman says, okay, just show me your union cards and I'll put you right to work. They're like, union cards? Like, yeah, no, dude, that's not how these things work. Okay, so they go to get their Rolls Royce, and their Rolls Royce has been towed because they had parked it in front of a hydrant. So then they're like, what are we going to do? Well, some guy shows up and he's just like, hey, I go to college near here, but I'm heading for the village. I can give you a lift down there, because Bobby and Hank had headed down to the village area in order to make some money. They always hang out in the village, but they're doing something different this time. So this random person gives 3 people a ride in his Volkswagen Beetle, and he is ranting and giving every indication that he is about to blow up a fertilizer bomb somewhere. Yeah. Because he's got some kind of big heavy box in the back, and he just yells, keep your hands off it. I mean, I don't mean to lose my temper. It just contains a science project. When it's finished, I'll show them what I can do. I'll show everybody. So the X-Men clearly should be, oh, maybe this is a better thing to pay attention to right now. Meanwhile, it turns out that Bobby and Hank are doing a whole acrobat act in this park to try to get people to donate money for the show. But then this lunatic who gave them a ride there was like, hey, there's a crowd. This is going to work out for me. So he changes into this Meccano suit that he stole from college, and then loudly declares that he is in league with the X-Men as he begins to cause havoc, including beating up the X-Men. But, you know, no one's going to pay attention to that.
Yeah.
He then is like, time to destroy the library.
So, of course, my wife, former New York City public librarian, expert on New York City public libraries, writing a book about them right now. And I was like, hey, Betsy, somebody is on top of the Washington Square Arch and then goes across the street to wreck a New York public library. What New York public library would that be? And she's like, there was not one. There has never been a New York Public Library within sight of the Washington Square Arch. But I was like, wow, that's explained in this book, because as soon as it's built, Meccano wrecks it. So it never entered the history books.
One panel I'll call out here on page 13, panel 4. The first half of the panel is just super silly and entertaining. The second half of the panel is quite upsetting. Meccano is knocking over these shelves of books saying Shakespeare, Zola, Hemingway, all the overrated pencil pushers of days past. Down with all of them and up with Meccano.
Yes.
You know, super silly, and I love it. Then he says, this is the time of the man of action, the will to power, not a time for useless words. It's like, oh, now we're into straight up fascist stuff. That's much less entertaining than the silly stuff up above.
Right.
Will to power. That's right out of Triumph of the Will there. The X-Men come in and they're fighting him. They're trying not to destroy things like a big microfiche reader that's being thrown at them. And Cyclops is able to use his beam to slowly lower the thing, which is not something I've ever seen him be able to do before or since. Eventually, it turns out that Meccano is trying to jump out across the street with his super Meccano powers and is about to actually fall to his death because he made a mistake. Marvel Girl actually saves him. And then the philanthropist who was building the library shows up and Meccano takes off his helmet. He's like, "Dad, it was me. You just love the library more than you love me." And the dad's like, "Oh, you're right. You know what? This is all my fault. I will write a check to the X-Men so they can get to Central Europe." The end.
Yes, the end. It is just an atrocious story. Just awful.
And the art is really just surprisingly bad.
It is.
Like you said, Ross Andrew is not a bad penciler, but this is not just George Bell's inking. He must have had to draw this thing in a weekend.
Yeah, that's the only explanation. Something nefarious has happened to Werner Roth, and Ross Andrew had to sweep in here and just dash this thing out. It's so sloppy and terrible. We do get a brief glimpse on the final page. Always the classic ending for any comic book is to have the heroes doing whatever they're doing on the last panel, and then suddenly we cut to looking over the shoulder of a bad guy who is watching them on a screen and plotting against them. So we get our first glimpse of the Changeling peeking over his shoulder here, but he will become a major character, I think, starting next issue.
All right. Well, once again, I've never read this particular tranche of issues here, so I did not know that. And we will find out more next issue. Okay, so I believe we have reached the end of this particular episode. Amazing Spider-Man was fantastic. Daredevil was ridiculous. Although, as you pointed out, a good fight sequence in there. Thor, unfortunately, had the return of Vince Colletta. And as you said, nothing much really happened in the issue, but lots of good action.
And great Tales of Asgard.
Yes, a great Tales of Asgard. Tales of Astonish, the Hulk story was decent, and the Namor story was a little bit weird. And Uncanny X-Men was terrible. Or sorry, not Uncanny X-Men. The tab up here on my thing says Uncanny X-Men. So just X-Men, terrible, trash.
Yeah, as I said about X-Men in my notes, talk about time-killing filler. The search for gas money is the last thing we need. Their mentor has been kidnapped. Let's get to Europe here. This is ridiculous. Really, really terrible. Not the best chunk of comics here. I'm glad we didn't have a guest. I'm glad that we subjected no one but ourselves to it. As always, we hope that people out there in podcast land can enjoy the episodes that are about books that aren't great just as much as they enjoy the episodes about books that are great. As I've said, we have fun and we poke fun. And when we can't have fun, we poke fun. And hopefully this has been more of a poke fun than have fun episode. So I hope either way, it was fun to listen to.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for listening. And we will be back with the rest of September of 1967 in a week.
Great. Okay. See you soon, everybody. Bye.
Take care. Stay safe out there. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed it, we now have a Patreon where you can show your appreciation. If you've got a few bucks, head over to patreon.marvelrereadclub.com to support us. Also, you can still rate and review us at your podcatcher of choice, and that would be greatly appreciated as well. You can find us online at marvelrereadclub.com, as well as Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Threads. See you next time.